The comfort that slowed everything. It didn't arrive as weakness. It arrived as relief. The kind that comes after years of pressure, risk, and relentless decision-making. Comfort felt earned, and no one questioned what it would eventually replace. This matters today because success often creates conditions so pleasant that urgency quietly disappears. When systems finally work, when crises fade, when growth becomes predictable, comfort steps in and promises stability. But comfort has a hidden cost. It slows everything. The billionaire at the center of this story had survived volatility most never face. Early years were defined by uncertainty, sharp instincts, and constant motion. Every decision mattered. Every delay carried risk. That intensity forged discipline and speed. Then the empire stabilized. Revenue streams matured. Processes locked in. Leadership layers thickened. Risk decreased. The organization no longer lived on the edge of survival. It lived inside control. And that control felt like victory. The reveal began with relief. Meetings felt calmer. Decisions felt safer. Fewer emergencies demanded attention. The billionaire could finally step back without fear of collapse. The system worked, even without constant pressure. That comfort felt like success. But comfort changes behavior before it changes results. The billionaire noticed fewer late-night calls, fewer urgent escalations, fewer moments where instinct had to outrun analysis. Everything had time now. Time to think, time to review, time to wait. Waiting felt responsible. The reveal deepened as the organization adapted to this new rhythm. Teams optimized for stability. Risk was framed carefully. Ambitious timelines softened. Decisions that once moved fast now moved deliberately, and then more slowly. No one complained. Comfort removes friction, and friction is where urgency lives. The billionaire began sensing the shift emotionally before seeing it structurally. Conversations felt easier, but less charged. Progress felt steady, but less exciting. The empire was moving, just not stretching. The first signal appeared externally. A smaller competitor moved aggressively into a space the empire had discussed casually for years. Not because the empire lacked insight, but because the move felt uncomfortable, disruptive, unnecessary, at least for now. Comfort had made waiting feel smart. The billionaire realized something unsettling. The organization was no longer constrained by fear or limitation. It was constrained by ease. Comfort had reduced the appetite for tension, reduced the tolerance for disruption, reduced the urgency that once forced bold movement. Nothing was broken, nothing was failing, but everything was slowing. The comfort that followed success was quietly becoming the force that reshaped decision-making. What once demanded action now invited delay. What once felt necessary now felt optional. The conflict was forming silently, not between people, but between momentum and ease. Because when comfort settles in, speed begins to feel reckless. And when speed feels reckless, the future starts choosing bolder leaders instead. The question was no longer whether the empire was strong. It was whether comfort had made it too comfortable to move. Comfort spread through habits rather than decisions. No one chose to slow down. The organization simply stopped feeling the pressure to move fast. Deadlines became flexible. Reviews became thorough. Caution was praised as maturity. Urgency was quietly reframed as recklessness. The reveal continued as risk tolerance shifted. Ideas that once would have sparked immediate testing now triggered long discussions. Not rejection, just refinement. Questions multiplied. Safeguards were added. What began as thoughtful consideration became a pattern of delay that felt responsible at every step. The billionaire watched this happen without alarm. Why rush when everything is working? The empire had earned patience. Years of volatility had been replaced by predictability. Growth curves smoothed out. Crises were rare. The system no longer required constant tension to survive. Comfort felt like proof that the hard part was over. But comfort has a way of dulling instincts. The conflict sharpened when early signals of change appeared. Subtle shifts in customer behavior. New expectations forming at the edges. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, just enough to suggest the environment was moving again. The response was measured. Let's monitor. Let's wait for confirmation. Let's not disrupt what's working. Comfort framed these choices as wisdom. The billionaire began noticing that conversations about the future felt abstract. Plans were discussed in quarters and years, not weeks. Speed was no longer a differentiator. Stability was. The empire prided itself on not overreacting. Meanwhile, others were reacting early. Competitors without the luxury of comfort moved decisively. They tested ideas in public. They failed visibly. They learned faster because they could not afford to wait. The empire observed, analyzed, and stayed put. The emotional tension surfaced quietly. The billionaire felt less adrenaline, less urgency, and less clarity. Decisions felt safe, but also less consequential. The stakes no longer felt sharp. The reveal deepened when a promising internal initiative stalled, not from opposition, but from ease. There was no pressure to decide quickly, no forcing function. The initiative drifted from priority to possibility to postponement. Comfort had removed the need to choose. The conflict was no longer about fear of failure. It was about absence of necessity. When nothing demands urgency, even important things wait. And when important things wait too long, the world moves on without them. Comfort had not stopped the empire. It had slowed it just enough to lose its edge, without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened. And that was the danger, because comfort never announces itself as the problem. It arrives disguised as success. The conflict reached its peak when comfort finally collided with acceleration. A sudden shift emerged, faster, sharper, and less forgiving than anything before it. What had once evolved gradually now changed in bursts. Expectations reset almost overnight. The empire felt unprepared, not because it lacked resources or intelligence, but because it had lost a habit of moving urgently. Decisions that once took days now took weeks. Alignment required comfort. Comfort required reassurance. Reassurance consumed time. The billionaire felt the mismatch immediately. What once felt careful now felt slow. What once felt stable now felt heavy. The emotional peak arrived during a crisis review meant to respond to the shift. The data was clear, the threat real, and yet the room hesitated. Plans were conservative, timelines cautious. The instinct to protect comfort over momentum was unmistakable. Others did not hesitate. Competitors moved fast and imperfectly. They claimed attention. They shaped narratives. They accepted friction as the price of speed. The empire entered later, with polished responses that landed after the moment had passed. The billionaire recognized the truth with painful clarity. Comfort had trained the organization to avoid tension, but tension was now the entry fee. The conflict deepened when teams admitted, quietly, that speed now felt risky. Acting before full clarity felt irresponsible inside a culture optimized for stability. Comfort had reshaped values. Moving fast was no longer admired. The realization hit hard. The empire had not lost its ability to act. It had lost its tolerance for discomfort. And without discomfort, urgency disappears. The conflict was no longer about strategy or execution. It was about whether the organization could reintroduce pressure without waiting for crisis to force it. Whether leaders could choose tension intentionally before the market chose it for them. Because comfort does not survive acceleration. It collapses under it. And unless the empire learned to move while uneasy again, the future would continue rewarding those still hungry enough to run toward friction, not away from it. The next move would require something deeply uncomfortable. Letting go of comfort, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. The climax arrived when the billionaire chose to disrupt comfort deliberately, not through crisis, not through fear, but through structure. In a clear shift of expectation, leaders were told that stability was no longer the primary measure of success. Urgency was reintroduced. Deadlines were shortened intentionally. Decisions were required before full reassurance. Teams were asked to move while uncertain, and supported when outcomes were imperfect. Discomfort was no longer a signal to slow down. It became a signal to engage. The resolution unfolded through friction. Meetings grew sharper. Conversations became less polite and more honest. Some initiatives failed quickly. Others accelerated unexpectedly. The empire began feeling alive again, not calm, but alert. The billionaire reflected on the lesson with clarity earned through ease. Comfort is a reward, not a strategy. When it becomes a goal, momentum fades. Stability protects the present. Urgency creates the future. By choosing tension before crisis demanded it, the billionaire restored speed without abandoning discipline. Comfort was repositioned as a byproduct, not a priority. The organization relearned how to move when nothing was broken. Because waiting for necessity is a luxury, the future never grants twice. The empire moved forward changed, faster, sharper, less comfortable, and more capable of meeting acceleration with intent. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The comfort